Good evening. On behalf of the League of Women Voters, I would like to welcome you to the Candidates Forum this evening. The League of Women Voters is an organization that is nonpartisan and volunteer-based. It is organized at the local, state, and national level to encourage citizens to participate in government. While the League of Women Voters members do study and take stands on issues, we do not endorse or support political parties or candidates. The LWV does encourage its members as individuals, as we encourage each of you to get involved in your community and the political party of your choice. However, the views expressed in this forum are those of the individual candidates and not those of the League of Women Voters. By sponsoring tonight's forum, the League provides an opportunity for citizen participation and exposure to candidates, but does not provide an endorsement of any candidate or candidates. All viable candidates have been invited to participate this evening. Dave Holden was not able to attend. Tonight's forum will be for the state representatives from Maple Grove, District 34. In tonight's forum, the candidates will start with 4 of the 5 questions they received in advance, in which they have 1 minute to respond. Then our candidates will have up to 30 seconds to respond to each of the questions submitted from the audience. Finally, they will be given 1 minute for the last question that is their final statement. Candidates, the League would like to request that you refrain from making personal attacks on your fellow candidates. I'd like to take this moment to point out our timekeepers for this evening. They will show you when you have 15 seconds to finish your statements. Then they will show you when your time has expired. Please finish your sentence at that time, as I will be directing the next speaker's turn. The order has been randomly selected. For the audience, please remember to turn off all communication devices at this time. There will be no photography for the duration of the forum. So tonight we have Dennis Smith and Joyce Pepin. And we'll start with Mr. Smith. The first question, please tell us about your background and previous civic involvement that support your candidacy for this position.
Good evening. I'm Dennis Smith, a candidate for State Representative, District 34B. For the past 6 months, I've been walking the district of Maple Grove and Osseo, seeking your support to serve the communities in the next legislature. I'm a 19-year resident of Maple Grove. My wife Sandra and I have 2 children, my daughter Lillian, 15, and my son Buchanan, who's 13. Our family attends St. Vincent de Paul Church. I'm an attorney. I have my own law practice here in Maple Grove. I'd like to serve as your state representative to help build a state in which good jobs pay good wages, where our schools are stronger and the focus is truly on the kids and financial accountability, and where patient-centered healthcare solutions replace a government-run system. I'm looking forward to our discussion this evening, and I wish my opponent was here so he could engage in this discussion with us. Thank you.
Ms. Pepin.
Thank you. My name is Joyce Pepin, and I currently represent House District 34A, which includes Rogers, the western part of Maple Grove, and the city of Dayton. And it's truly been an honor and a privilege to serve you, and I appreciate your past support. I currently serve on several committees, including the Subcommittee on Employee Relations, which deals with our labor contracts through the state, the Rules Committee, the Tax Committee, and I'm the lead on the Government Operations Committee. I also feel I'm qualified because in the 2010 legislative session, I had the opportunity to chair the Government Operations and Elections Committee, and I was able to successfully manage a budget. My main priority as a legislator has been to be a strong fiduciary of our tax dollars, and I think I've done a good job doing that. I will continue to fight government waste and to make sure that our dollars are spent wisely. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question. Do you support the minimum wage increases enacted this past year? Why or why not? If not, where would you have set the minimum wage? Mr. Smith.
Instead of talking about a minimum wage, I would like to talk about a maximum wage. The minimum wage issue puts our state at a competitive disadvantage with the other states near Minnesota and the other states in the country. We need to create good jobs that create good wages. The business climate in this state does not allow that. We have underemployment in this state of 53%. So over half of the workers in this state are not earning the full wage that they've earned in the past. We have the lowest labor force participation since 1979. So while the minimum wage is something that should have been increased, and I probably would have voted for it, but I think a federal compliance, so there's the same minimum wage with all the states, it would be an area to go with that, instead of having Minnesota have a higher minimum wage than the federal.
Ms. Peppin.
Thank you. I voted against the minimum wage when it was heard before us for many of the same reasons that have already been stated. First and foremost, I believe it puts our state at a disadvantage because it's not in alliance with the neighboring states, and it's much higher than the federal minimum wage. The problem with that is then, well, there's multiple problems, but the problem is that it can drive businesses out of the state. It can force fewer businesses to hire fewer young people for jobs, and it drives up the cost overall, which drives up the cost of goods and services for us. So I think that we do need to start talking about creating a job climate in Minnesota where businesses can be competitive and we can bring those high wage jobs to Minnesota and not concern ourselves with, the current minimum wage.
Thank you. Next question, Mr. Smith, do you support reduction in taxes for residents and businesses? Why or why not?
The original question was, do I support further reduction in taxes? And that implies that there's been a reduction in taxes in the last session. Governor Dayton and the democratically controlled Senate and House raised taxes $2.1 billion in the last session. That's the highest tax increase in the history of this state. After there was significant pushback from that, there was roughly $450 million of taxes that were rolled back before they were implemented. So our state is experiencing a $1.6 billion tax increase. So we need to lower taxes in this state, and we can start by rolling back the taxes that were implemented this last session. As mentioned before, the business climate in this state, we are inviting and in some cases forcing companies to seek residency elsewhere. We need to make Minnesota the best place to work and to own a business, and right now it isn't.
Ms. Peppin.
Thank you. The problem with our current government is that it's one-party control. Democrats control the House, the Senate, and the governor's office. And the result of that one-party control was a $2.1 billion tax increases. And I've noticed that there have been some ads on implying that there have been tax cuts, and there have been. There was a little bit of a rollback of the $2.1 billion tax increase, but over the biennium that still results in a $1.6 billion increase. And so I think before we ever consider raising taxes, we need to look at the spending that we do in Minnesota and make sure there's not wasteful spending. Just this week, there was a story of a community organization called Community Action that has not been run properly. It has been bilking the state of funds, and until we get a grip on all the money that we've handed out as a state and all the money that we spend, we shouldn't be taxing anymore.
Thank you. Question number 4, Mr. Smith. There are currently laws that require the state to give preference to women and minorities in the selection of bids for state contract awards. However, there is not funding to enforce these laws. Do you favor additional funding to provide enforcement of these laws? Why or why not?
I think this is largely a federal issue. If we're going to look at this from a state issue, I think there needs to be compliance with the federal law, the county, and the state as well. There is as mentioned before, we've created a business climate where all the businesses are being forced to be put in a position where they cannot succeed. In regard to the funding issue, I think it's premature to say that there's inadequate funding for this particular program. I think that we need to look at how many employees are in the enforcement division for this, as well as the type of funding that they've received before we look at increasing the funding for the enforcement of it. Thank you.
Ms. Peppin.
Thank you. Part of the problem with leaving the set aside for women and minorities is that it makes it very difficult to enforce. That's the question. What we've seen happening in some cases is that it might be a male-owned business and the person may have his wife or a female family member all of a sudden become the owner of the business so that they can qualify for the award. And that's why one of the reasons that we need to look at enforcement is this happening? We don't know if this is happening all the time. But if that is happening, then we're not creating a playing field that's fair in any way, shape, or form. We're not truly looking at whether or not these are women and minority-owned businesses. Regarding the enforcement of this, I don't know if it's being enforced or not. I do know that there's an awful lot of staff in the division that should be able to enforce such a requirement under law, and it's just a question of making sure that we have some current staff directed to do so.
Thank you. Now we'll switch to questions submitted from the audience, in which you have 30 seconds to reply. Mr. Smith. Some recent reports have shown Minsure to be poorly managed. Who do you feel is responsible for the problems Minsure has endured? What would you do to address these issues?
Thank you. Minsure has been a colossal failure. The system is literally crumbling. Last week, we saw the largest provider that holds 60% of the policies choose not to be in this program. We need massive reform in this program in order for it to work effectively. And the amount of taxes that this program is bringing to the businesses is really crumbling these businesses as well. It's not uncommon for these businesses to receive 30, 50, sometimes 100% increase for businesses that are between 5.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Peppin?
Minsure has been a failure. The cost of Minsure alone was over $300 million for the cost of the agency and the cost of the website. There are over 80 employees at Minsure, and the annual operating cost is $76.3 million. One of the largest providers has pulled out, and yet people are still concerned that they're not going to be covered next year. It has not worked. The executive director had to resign under scandal when she was off taking a vacation. People were wondering if they had health care. That's not acceptable. And now that the largest insurer has pulled out, we're going to face that again.
Next question, Mr. Smith. Why did you agree to participate in this forum, and why do you think it is important?
I think it's important, thank you for the question. I think it's important to talk with people in the communities of Maple Grove and Osseo every opportunity that I get. That is one reason why I've been walking around through the district over the last 6 months asking for people's vote on November 4th. My leadership style will be a responsive one, where I want to hear from the people in the community about issues that are concerning them, and this forum is another way to do that. Thank you.
Ms. Peppin.
Thank you. While I do not have an opponent this time, I do believe it's my responsibility to come in front of the voters and to give them the opportunity to ask me questions about how I feel on certain issues or how I voted in the past. I just believe that that's your job when you're an elected official, that you need to come and stand before the voters and take questions whether or not you have an opponent.
Thank you. Next question, Mr. Smith. If you have the opportunity to stop the building of the new Senate office building, would you do so? Why or why not?
Thank you. I would stop the building of the new Senate office building. That was $90 million that the state spent that was not needed to be spent. That could be significant dollars used. That could be over $1 million to each of our counties in this state to be used for road repair, to fix our roads and our bridges. That office building just simply was not needed, and is a classic example of what happens when we have Democrats control the governorship in both houses. Thank you.
Ms. Peppin.
I also would vote to stop the progress of the building and did fight to do so and vote to do so during the legislative session. A $90 million luxury state office building for a small number of senators works out to more. There's 67 senators. This works out to more than $1 million per senator. We could have been done for a much cheaper amount, and frankly, it could have been used for education, transportation, any number of things. And when we have a tax increase of almost $2 billion, it's just unacceptable.
Thank you. Next question, Mr. Smith. Do you believe that daycare providers and personal care providers should be required to unionize? Why or why not?
Thank you. I do not believe any business, daycare providers or healthcare providers, should be forced to unionize. unions have the ability people and businesses have the ability to join a union if they so choose, but having the state government force businesses to do so is not wise policy. Thank you.
Ms. Peppin.
No, absolutely not. Childcare unions, personal care attendants, people like this that are small business owners should not be forced to unionize. The point of unions is to protect you from your employer. When you are the employer, it doesn't make any sense. What it does do is it drives up the cost for the provider, it drives up the cost for the families who are trying to get daycare, and really this bill was just about finding another way, another source of union money, and frankly it was against the will of many daycare providers.
Thank you. Next question, Mr. Smith. Do you support a law that would limit spending on campaigns by corporations and unions? Why or why not?
Our funding process for campaigns is something that need to be looked at, and I would look at that and explore all ideas. But if we're going to look at campaign finance laws, really both sides need to participate. While business contributions need to be examined and managed, also union participation and union dollars needs to be looked at and to be part of the solution as well.
Ms. Peppin.
I agree. So often when we hear about campaign finance reform, you'll hear folks talking about business and how awful business is and businesses buying elections and whatnot. But the fact of the matter is, there's a lot of money being spent on both sides. And so I would challenge you to, whenever you hear a politician talk about we need to have campaign finance reform, I would challenge you to encourage that legislator to look at both sides of the aisle. There's needs to be reform all the way around, and not just against business, also against union.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, would you support a right-to-work law in Minnesota? Why or why not?
The issue about whether people are forced to join a union and the impact on that, as discussed previously, people need to have the ability to join a union or not join a union, but it should not be forced upon them based on what unions or what industry they work in. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Peppin?
I believe that we need to have more competition in the bidding process, and we shouldn't go for the highest cost bidder just because they're unionized. There's a lot to look at. We need to look at the quality of work. We need to look at the cost, because at the end of the day, it's the job of the legislature to look out for taxpayer money. And sometimes that it's not going to be just the highest union contract to wage. Sometimes it's going to be the lower wage from non-union contractors.
Thank you. Next question. Mr. Smith, over the past 20 years, college tuition has risen faster than almost any other good or service. What policies can the state do to help restrain the rise in college tuition?
Thank you. Part of the answer, I think, is having an understanding, which I think most of the public does not understand, as to why there is such a rise in public education. This is having a profound impact. We currently have a shortage of doctors in the state of Minnesota, principally because of the cost of the education. So we need to look at how we can make college affordable for all of the families. Anyone who wants to go to college in this state, we need to find out a way for them to be able to go to college and have college be affordable, and the costs associated with that need to be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Peppin?
One of the reasons that college costs have gotten so high is the rising cost of administration, the need for professors to have assistant professors and other assistant professors. And when I sit on the subcommittee on employee relations, and we look at some of the contracts and some of these packages these professors and staff have are pretty lucrative, frankly. And so we need to look at that. We can't do much about it from the University of Minnesota perspective, but for the state colleges and universities, we do have a little bit more control, and we can put some caps on tuition raises.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, how important do you view early childhood education as a component in improving education outcome? And what might you propose to better prepare our young children for kindergarten?
Thank you. Early child education is very important. There's many facets that go into this solution. Part of it is support for families and and giving families the opportunity to participate in programs, but also holding families accountable for participating and for preparing their children for the education process that they'll receive. All the tests that I've seen show that children who receive proper education when they're younger, regardless of the format, are able to have more success later on in life.
Thank you. Ms. Peppin?
Thank you. Early childhood is vitally important to our state and our future and our work environment. So if we look at state funding, we have to prioritize the importance of that compared to the cost of the K-12 education system. And frankly, there's limited resources, so that's something we're going to have to really give a lot of consideration to. And I think if we do decide to spend more state resources on it, we have to make sure that the early education is actually educational and it's not just at some type of a glorified daycare center.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, do you support changing how our state Supreme Court justices are seated? What method would you support, or why do you support the current election process?
Thank you. Election of judges is in our Constitution, in the Minnesota Constitution, and I believe that should be followed. We should have fair and open elections, so we have the best judicial oversight and the best justices serve our state. Thank you.
Ms. Peppin?
Thank you. There's been a discussion in the last few years in the legislature about whether or not we should have retention elections, meaning whether there should be a panel that looks at judges and just simply decides and lets the voters know whether they're competent or not. I have some concerns with this method because I believe it's the voters who need to decide. And I agree that this is something that's, the elections of justices are in our state constitution, and we need to be able to vote on them once they've been appointed. But I do have some concerns with retention elections.
Next question, Mr. Smith. What are your views on Common Core as an educational mandate?
I don't think Common Core is, I think while the intent of Common Core is misunderstood a great deal, I think Common Core does not serve the children in our state in a very good way. And the state should do everything we can to step away from Common Core, not have it implemented in our schools, and make sure that their children are receiving the absolute best education possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Peppin.
Minnesota is known as a leader in education throughout the country. And when we look at programs like Common Core, the problem that we find is that it's, instead of raising the bar, it's lowering the bar to the lowest common denominator. I think we need to run from that. I think Minnesota should keep its high standards and that we shouldn't look to Common Core to fix our problems. Of course, we want to have standards where people can graduate, but to just look at some federal program and try to compare ourselves to states like Louisiana and Mississippi and some of the other low-performing states is a mistake.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, next question. Please describe your public policy governance experience.
This is the first time that I'm running for public office. So from a public policy perspective, I've been an active follower of public policy in the local, the state, and the federal policies. And I look forward to serving serving the communities of Maple Grove and Osseo in the state of Minnesota come January 1st. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Peppin.
Well, I've been in the Minnesota House for the past 10 years. I've been lead on a number of committees. I've been chair of a committee, managed budgets. I've also served on various local boards, such as the Mary Queen of Peace, which is my parish. I've served on the school board for that, and the Friends of the Library Board, and various other civic organizations like that.
Thank you. Next question, Mr. Smith. Would you shrink or expand state government? Give examples of what programs you would cut or grow.
That's a complicated answer. Overall, state spending should be held in line, and state spending and the state government should shrink. But there definitely are some programs within the state that could benefit from increased spending. So while some programs should have funding decreased and some programs should be eliminated altogether, there certainly are some areas of our state budget that need to have increased spending, two of which would be education and our infrastructure for transportation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Peppin.
I believe that we need to look at all of our programs and services and make sure we're getting the most bang for the buck. Currently in Minnesota, we have no mechanism for reining in the different agencies and the different kind of groups they create. We currently have, I think, over 9 agencies that deal with water issues alone. So we're creating the system where we don't even know what the left hand is doing when the right hand is doing. They don't know what each other's doing. We're creating a big behemoth of a government, and we need to rein that in so that we can centralize some of these services, streamline them, and make sure that we're using the taxpayer money wisely.
Thank you. Next question. Mr. Smith, what can you do in St. Paul to bring more startups and businesses to Maple Grove?
Minnesota really has some dismal results in regard to the startups. A recent report shows that Minnesota is dead last in our country. We're 50th for startup businesses. That's just unacceptable. Decreased regulation and decreased taxes are 2 important elements to allow businesses and show them that we want them to start their business in Minnesota and in Maple Grove and Osseo as well.
Ms. Pepin.
Unfortunately, the last few years have not been very business friendly. One example is the last legislative session when the governor and the legislature implemented the warehouse tax. That is an anti-business tax, and it wound up having a lot of businesses either not expanding here or threatening to not expand here. So what we need to do is we need to fix the climate, the tax climate, so that we're competitive with our neighboring states in the country. We need to decrease regulation, and we need to look at other things that can incentivize them, such as the angel investor tax credit.
Thank you. Believe it or not, we've already gone through all the audience questions. So we are going to the closing question. Mr. Smith, in summary, how do you intend to best serve your district and move the state forward?
I would like to thank the League of Women Voters and North Hennepin Area Chamber of Commerce for hosting this event. I truly appreciate it. I also wish that my opponent was here this evening to help engage in this discussion. I will work very hard to move this state forward. In my responsive leadership style, I will communicate with constituents, I will listen and engage with the public of everyone in the communities of Maple Grove and Osseo. I've door-knocked quite a bit of the district, and I'm on track to door-knock the entire district twice by election day. If I'm fortunate enough to win the election, my priorities in St. Paul will be to promote job creation spurred by the private sector, creating good jobs that pay good wages, strong public schools where the focus is on kids and parents, and ensuring financial accountability for taxpayers, free market healthcare solutions that preserve patient choice, not a government takeover or limited government, and support for effective programs that serve seniors, veterans, and disabled. More information about my campaign can be found at DennisSmith.org. I respectfully and humbly ask for your vote on November 4th. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pepin.
Once again, thank you so much to the League and the Chamber for providing this forum for us to come and address the citizens of the district tonight. It's been an honor and a privilege to serve you in the Minnesota House of Representatives, and I hope you'll give me the opportunity to continue to do so. As I stated in the beginning, I view one of my biggest responsibilities as being a good fiduciary of taxpayer dollars, so I pledge to you tonight that I will continue to look at the dollars that are spent, your hard-earned tax dollars, and to make sure that they are spent in the most effective and streamlined means possible. And also, I encourage everyone watching this broadcast to look at what's happened in Minnesota the last couple of years with one-party control and the things that have happened. Your vote is extremely important. We need to make some major change in the state of Minnesota. I hope you will take this election seriously. And as for me, I respectfully and humbly ask for your vote again in November. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the program for tonight. Once again, on behalf of the League of Women Voters and the North Hennepin Area Chamber of Commerce, I would like to thank the candidates for agreeing to participate in tonight's forum. I would also like to thank the voters for attending and participating by submitting excellent questions, and I would like to thank the viewing audience as well. Remember that if we could not get to your question tonight, or if you have any further questions for the candidates, we invite you to contact them directly with your concerns. Please remember to get out and vote on November 4th as your vote truly counts. Thank you and have a great evening.